Hello Fearseekers, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to be diving into some disturbing, allegedly true horror stories. If you enjoy the content and want to help the channel grow, consider leaving a like and subscribing to keep up with future videos. Now without further ado, sit back, put any idea of sleep away, and get ready to ferment your fears. Back in the day, my parents had an authentic Japanese motif for their bedroom. My mom was an interior designer and spent all of her free time antiquing for different pieces, as she called them. I remember a huge Buddha statue made from solid brass at the foot of their bed and a silk room divider depicting different scenes from an ancient Japanese dynasty. There was a lot more to it all that I'm not remembering because I was very young at the time. At some point, my mother came home with two beautiful antique lamps that had come straight from Japan through a client of hers. The lamps were carved and painted porcelain, and like the room divider, they depicted scenes from a long ago simpler time in Japan. The main design on the lamps was a geisha woman holding a fan partially obscuring her face. Each lamp had one, but each geisha was slightly different. They were very delicate, highly detailed, and very beautiful. My sister, who was also very young at the time, dubbed them the Sisters. This story actually centers around my sister, who we'll call Elle. One night, our parents were out to dinner with friends, so they called in our babysitter, Doris. At the time, the TV channels in our den were restricted, but our parents got all the cable channels in their bedroom, so we all would hang out there when they weren't home. This particular night, we were all watching something R-rated and scary, and it got late, so my brother and I went to our bedrooms. My sister stayed up with Doris to watch the rest of the movie. My sister said Doris was dozing off and she was left to watch the scary movie by herself. Trying not to look at the screen during a particularly scary part, Elle looked toward one of the lamps on the nightstand. Glancing at it quickly, she said it looked like something on the lamp moved. Staring at it now, she swore something was moving on both lamps. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. She said the geisha on the lamps were moving and fluttering their fans while whispering and giggling at her and to each other. Petrified and in total disbelief, Elle screamed and woke the babysitter. Doris was woken by her cries and must have thought the house was on fire. My sister pointed to the lamps. Doris, still a bit disoriented, for just a second saw the geisha move their fans back into position and freeze. She calmed my sister down by telling her it was only her imagination, and eventually Elle fell asleep. After putting my sister to bed, Doris waited in the den for my parents to get home. She never mentioned anything about the lamps, but anytime my mother called her after that, she was busy and would never come to our house again. Years later, when I was already an adult, I ran into Doris. She asked me how everyone was doing and if we still lived there. I told her no, and that my mother had a fire shortly after we moved and lost almost everything. When I asked her why she never came back, she said, "You're not gonna believe this, but that last night I was there, something really strange happened." She said that night, while she was the only one left awake after putting Elle to bed, she kept hearing voices coming from my parents' room. She first thought it was my sister pretending to sleep and pranking her. When she realized that Elle was fully asleep, she became truly afraid. She said the only thing that kept her from running out of the house and never looking back was her responsibility to my parents, adding that before my sister went to bed, she saw something that she would never forget. I asked, "Was it the Japanese lamps?" She replied, "No one would ever believe me, but I saw them move. I know what I saw, and Elle saw it too." This was many years ago, and I never saw Doris again. My brother had his own experiences with those lamps also while we lived there. After that initial night, time passed, my parents divorced, and my mother sold that house when I graduated from high school. She had a new house built in the country where she planned to enjoy her early retirement. She transported all of her beloved pieces there when it was completed. Within 5 years, a freak fire broke out while she wasn't home, and the house and everything in it burned to the ground. The firefighters said they never saw a house fire that burned so hot. It was so intense that the following day, the top of the refrigerator was touching the floor like a rainbow. Later on, my mother told me although the fire was devastating in many ways, it was also liberating. When I was still married to my military husband, he was overseas and I moved our daughters and myself to our follow-on duty station. I rented a 100-plus-year-old house. It was wonderful, out in a rural area with a huge yard. The only problem was, it had mysterious happenings. One of the things that I soon learned happened on a regular basis was the knocker. The basement of the house was very dark and damp. My washer and dryer and deep freeze were in the basement, so I did have to go down in it quite often. I never allowed my 2 young children down there due to the dark and dampness. The only entrance to the basement was a door located in the kitchen. It happened to be right next to the back door, which was also in the kitchen. Not long after we moved in, I heard knocking on the back door. Thinking it must be a neighbor, I went to answer it. As I approached the door, I realized the knocking wasn't coming from the back door at all. It was coming from the basement door. I knew my children were in the living room and couldn't figure out who would be in my basement. I opened the door to see no one there. This occurred on a regular basis. At least once a week, I heard the knocker. The neighbors and owner of the home knew nothing about it. I also hung a photo of my husband and I up on the wall by the front door. Many mornings I came in to find it either hanging upside down or laying on the floor beneath one of the chairs or sofa. I would replace the photo and leave it at that. My parents came to visit one weekend. We were sitting in the living room and suddenly we heard knocking on the back door. I tried to ignore it, but my very practical mother insisted on answering the door. I followed her to the door, insisting she just ignore it. She thought I was terribly rude. Then, she opened the door. Realizing there was no one there, she literally marched back into the living room, picked up her purse, and as she was going out the door, said, "Mel, I'll be in the car." He drove her the 3 hours home, and she refused to ever come back. Another time, after my husband returned from overseas, we had guests over. A husband, wife, and their infant son, and we were all sitting in the living room. Suddenly, the husband stopped talking and was staring at the wall next to the front door. Never taking his eyes off of what he was looking at, he said, "Susan, get the baby. It's time to go home." We followed his gaze to the front door and watched as the photo of my husband and myself was slowly turning upside down. There were other strange occurrences, and it soon became apparent that whatever it was did not like my husband at all. If he upset me or the children in any way, things picked up and something bad always happened to him. One day, following an argument, he left to drive to a local Kmart. He called me from the store. He was almost to the store when the left driver's side rear wheel came off the truck and he wrecked it. He apologized to me. He called the entity Hardy. It followed us to our next base, but seemingly left when we divorced. One of the creepiest stories I know personally is from my best friend David when he was home at his house babysitting a friend's kid. The kid, whose name was Junior, was roughly 4 to 5, I want to say. David's dad was a courier, so would often be doing deliveries late at night. David was a teen by this point, so being home without an adult was no great task. It's important to mention that his father was a pretty paranoid individual who bought into a lot of fear-mongering in the world, so he had cameras set up all over the place. I want to say this happened in 2014. Anyway, David was busy in his bedroom and was minding his own business, but then decided to head into his den, where all the cameras happened to be set up, but the den was locked. David knocked on the door to the den and Junior opened it up. "Why did you lock the door?" David asked. "Because of the lady," Junior said. "What lady?" David asked. "Your mom. I saw her in the kitchen." The house's living room was directly connected to the kitchen, and if you were standing in the kitchen entryway, you could see the door leading outside. It was one of those screened-in sitting areas. Junior claimed that David's mother was right there in the doorway. Really strange, especially considering David's mother had passed away just about 8 months prior. David was chilled by the remark, but the skeptic in him knew it was likely just Junior's overly active imagination, so he agreed to go and check with him. He brought a kitchen knife, if I'm remembering the story correctly. He walked with Junior down the hallway, then into the kitchen where the door was open. The door being open was pretty normal. It was a hot summer day and the house trapped a lot of heat. David stepped out onto the screen sitting area and looked left down the ramp his mother used to use to get outside. Nothing. He looked to the right, seeing the length of the yard. Again, nothing. Junior was insistent that there was someone there, which was strange, considering usually in situations like this, kids tend to feel better after you poke around for them. David couldn't calm him down. Junior was certain. He kept saying, "I saw your mom, she was here." So David bargained with him. "Everything's recorded on the cameras, so we'll just look at them and we'll know for certain whether someone was there or not." So they sifted through the cameras and David looked for a timestamp around when Junior claimed that his deceased mother had shown up. He stared down at all the cameras as the timer ticked on and nothing showed up. But suddenly, he watched as the camera showed a figure enter his backyard from the front by pulling the latch. An old woman, at least in her mid-60s, confidently walked into their backyard. She had a cloth grocery bag in her hand. She headed up the ramp and stood in their screen sitting area for a few minutes. She then reached for the door to the kitchen, cracking it open before brazenly stepping inside. After some time, Junior saw her in the kitchen and headed to the den to hide, where David found him. Based on the camera's timestamps, she stood in the kitchen for at least 10 minutes. The absolutely insane part is, she left right as David went to investigate with Junior. The camera footage showed him looking around and her leaving as he looked around. When he looked left down at the ramp where she'd come up, she had already wrapped around and actually took the long way around through the length of the yard. When he looked right, he quite literally just missed her. It was genuinely a matter of maybe half a second. Someone wandered right through his backyard, into his home, then stood there for 10 minutes in his kitchen doing God knows what. Nothing was stolen, nobody was harmed or anything. Well anyway, the night went on and nothing came of it. Me personally, I would have phoned the police, but David wouldn't. I think there's a chance that his dad may have had some guns that were acquired through perhaps some non-reputable methods. They were locked away from everyone, whatever small comfort that is, so David's instinct was that his dad would likely be furious about the police being called. Well anyway, some time passed. Days, weeks, who knows? I'm not even sure how this information came about, but somehow David was told by either a family member or a staff member that the old woman that wandered into the house had dementia and had an episode and just sort of found herself there by a string of coincidences. I was 13 when this happened, and it still gives me nightmares thinking about it. My parents wanted to go out on a date night, so they left me home on a Friday night, I am an only child, so I stayed home alone. We had a one-story home with a daylight basement that had its own entrance. We live on a dead-end street that is pretty quiet in the evening, so not many cars come and go. My neighbors are pretty close to my house too, so I didn't feel uncomfortable being home by myself. So, my parents left around 6 p.m. for their dinner reservation, and I had a nice hot pizza delivered and was ready to watch some scary movies all by myself. I was excited. I locked the door behind them and popped on the TV. I was scrolling through the movies on my Roku app and decided to watch one of the Halloween movies first. I snuggled in my nice, warm, fuzzy blanket on the couch, got comfy, and began my night alone. About an hour passed and I got up to use the bathroom. While in the bathroom, I thought I heard noises coming from the basement. It sounded like something was moving around, but I figured I was home alone. What could it be? So I brushed it off as nothing. I finished in the bathroom and went back to my couch to finish the movie. Another 5 minutes passed and again, moving noises in the basement. Now I started getting that nervous feeling in my gut. I stopped the movie to listen for more noises. I thought about that entrance door down there and wondered if it was locked. I assumed my parents locked it. I hoped they did. I didn't know what to do. I took a deep breath and decided to walk towards the basement and put my ear to the door. What a mistake. I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. I froze in fear. This has never happened to me before. I have been home alone in the past, but mostly during the day. I know the obvious thing to do would be to call the cops, but did I do that? No. I ran outside and went to my neighbor's house and banged on their door. Thankfully, they were home and let me in. I was out of breath, scared, and couldn't get the words out fast enough. I asked them to please call the cops, that there was someone in my house. They called 911 and the cops came over within 10 minutes. I also called my parents to let them know what was going on. I let the cops check out the house and I stayed at my neighbor's where I felt safe. After some time, one of the cops came over to my neighbor's house and said they didn't find anyone in the house, but did say that whoever it was came in through the basement entrance. It must have been unlocked. Nothing was taken and everything was in its place. My parents got home and, of course, were very upset and scared. The cops assured us the house was clear and to please lock our doors and windows at all times. They think this person saw my parents leave and assumed the house was empty. I don't want to think that this person knew I was home alone. After some thought, my mother said, "Oh no, I don't think we locked the basement door." She just assumed since we lived in a quiet neighborhood, we were safe, so she didn't really worry about it. Needless to say, after this night, we all made sure every door and window stayed locked. They still leave me alone, but they let the next door neighbors know when they do, just in case. I still think about this night, and it gives me nightmares. I am 16 now and feel a little uneasy being home alone, but I know I need to get over it. Please stay safe out there and always lock your doors. You don't know who is lurking around your neighborhood. Hey guys, glad to see you made it to the end of the video. Have you ever had an experience with an object you believe to be haunted or cursed? Make sure to let me know in the comments below. If you have any stories you'd like to be narrated, be sure to send them in. Alright guys, that just about wraps up the video. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So long, Fearseekers. I'll see you in the next video.
She's not dead.